You know, ranking the strongest or weakest characters in Bleach is always a fun exercise. And honestly, a lot of the time, whether our opinions align or not, I feel like it's mostly fairly simple to do. The vast majority of characters are pretty straightforward in terms of what they bring to the table when it comes to their fights. Most of them you can evaluate purely by what you see unfolding on the page or screen before you. But among the cast of Bleach, there are a couple of characters in particular who don't fit that mould, who aren't so simple to rank or to place, despite the fact that they are obviously powerful in their own right. There's a subset of characters in Bleach who fall under the, and I mean this in the most complimentary of ways, mad scientist banner, who completely eschew the traditional means of combat and power, and who, as a result, when it comes to trying to figure out the power hierarchy and structure of the cast, end up falling outside the norm. There are several mad scientist type characters in Bleach, but the two we'll be looking at today in particular are Kisuke Urahara and his successor Mayuri Kurotsuchi, as honestly I think they best embody what is the crux of this video topic today. How strong really are these particular characters, and how do you actually defeat them? Specifically, how do you defeat a character who is capable of preparing for absolutely anything in a way that seems almost superhuman? Kisuke and Mayuri are two of the most prepared characters in Bleach, and preparation is probably a word that'll be cropping up a lot. Because outside of their many special powers and abilities, what makes these characters truly strong is the way they are capable of preparing for the battle to come, often presenting timely and unique solutions to just about any issue that befalls them in the midst of a fight. Of course, at its core, it's a literary device. Having the scientists prepare for their battles is not only a way to make them stand out, and to emphasise their intelligence in ways simply not possible for most other characters, but also as a way for the author to overcome any narrative obstacles that might be in the way, both in and outside of battle. In a sense, alongside everything else they can do, the power to prepare is, in itself, a special ability. However, speaking of special powers and abilities, first a message from today's sponsor, Marvel Strike Force. Despite doing the majority of my gaming on console, I do also play a lot of mobile games too. Specifically, I like mobile games where you can collect characters, which is where Marvel Strike Force comes in. You can download Marvel Strike Force for free on mobile or PC if that's more your thing right now by visiting the link in the description or scanning my QR code. Marvel Strike Force lets you take on potentially world-ending threats with a team of your favourite heroes and villains straight from the comics and movies. We're talking Marvel powerhouses like Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, and yes, the Fantastic Four, by taking them through the game's many different modes featuring both PvE campaigns and PvP battle arenas, including a huge weekly alliance battle. Ultimately, you want to build a squad that's powerful enough to take on anything, and the game's meta is evolving all the time, so you'll almost certainly find a use for every character you love. And speaking of which, new players can unlock a total of 17 characters within the first 30 days of play, while August is full of totally free character giveaways to help bolster your roster even further. And of course, this is all happening off the back of the newest Marvel movie to hit cinemas, Fantastic Four: First Steps. And to celebrate, Marvel Strike Force is giving away the entire team, so that's Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben for free. For a limited time, use promo code MSF4 to unlock Marvel's first family and take them into battle. Make sure to visit my link in the description or scan the QR code up here to download the game for free now, either on mobile or PC. Alright, thanks everyone, and enjoy the game. And so, without further ado, in today's video, I wanted to look at both Kisuke and Mayuri in particular, and try to get to the bottom of how strong they really are. What does strength mean for characters like this? How much of their strength does their preparation account for? Is there any way to write these characters in a fight that doesn't really involve preparation at all, and what can we learn from their battle history? Ultimately, I get it. These guys are the trademark super intelligent characters of Bleach, and so this is just how they fight. but it's so against the grain in terms of how it meshes with the usual Bleach character, the usual Bleach fight, the usual Bleach power set, that I find it fascinating. So let's take a look. Of course, if you enjoyed today's video, then consider hitting subscribe down below, as your support really does make all the difference in the world, and it would be greatly appreciated. What makes Kisuke and Mayuri so completely different from every other character in the series, for the most part anyway, and we'll get to that briefly, is their ability to plan for every eventuality, even if it seems as though they had little to no time to realistically do so. This makes them practically impossible to conventionally defeat in battle, and it's why they are both usually so hard to rank when it comes to figuring out how strong each character is. Because their preparation is fundamentally a part of how they fight. They very rarely, if ever, enter into a battle without some kind of a scheme, and so it always needs to be taken into account. When people discuss potential fights and matchups, when characters like Kisuke and Mayuri are included, there's almost always a prep element included in that, because it plays such a big role. The fact is, when these two are given sufficient prep time, they can defeat, well, virtually anyone, regardless of how strong their opponent is. All conventional wisdom goes out the window, as they are often able to produce the perfect solution to any matchup, and it's just something we as readers accept due to the nature of their characters. The fact is that these characters are simply not beholden to the same rules as literally everyone else, because there's no limit to what they can achieve, because what they can achieve is simply based on the whims of the author. Now, I know what you're thinking, well, this is a piece of fiction. Isn't that technically true for everyone? But generally, when you create a narrative, when you have a world like Bleach, there are baked-in innate rules that need to be adhered to. Kisuke and Mayuri exist outside of that. The usual rules do not apply. And of course, there are some great examples of this throughout the series, and interestingly, looking at them actually highlights how, despite these two characters functioning similarly on the surface, they themselves actually have two very different versions of what being prepared actually means. For example, Mayuri is generally more direct, and often refers to outright modifying either his or someone else's body to suit the situation ahead of time. He himself is often the solution. Against Xyloporo, by planting surveillance bugs inside Uryu, Mayuri was able to observe that Xyloporo had the power to directly target and crush his victim's internal organs. So in response, and in the span of barely an hour, Mayuri replaces all of his internal organs with dummies, so that Xyloporo can't affect him. When questioned on how this is even possible, Mayuri's only explanation given is simply, well, I'm here, so clearly it was doable. In fact, his battle with Xyloporo is just a brilliant breakdown of this phenomenon in action, and maybe the most egregious Mayuri's character has ever been. When Xyloporo suddenly takes control of Mayuri's bankai, Mayuri simply detonates it, having apparently built that feature into Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo in case of any such eventuality. When Xyloporo resurrects himself from inside Nemu, surprise surprise, Mayuri apparently tests a variety of drugs, stores them within his lieutenant at all times, and so Xyloporo just happened to be afflicted by the crippling effects of the superhuman drug. Let's look at another fight, Mayuri versus Giselle. In this battle, Mayuri comes up against the zombified Bambietta and actually uses a gadget this time. But again, it is a gadget that is perfectly suited to dealing with this enemy that, as far as we know, Mayuri had no intel on previously. Bambietta's main ability is the power to launch reishi orbs that turn whatever they touch into a bomb. During this battle, Mayuri uses these gadgets that capture the reishi and then forcibly delay the explosion, completely nullifying Bambietta's power. And so that's another good example. Mayuri proudly states that by doing so, he's totally shut Bambietta down, and he's right. But it's not through any real skill or power of his. And frankly, it's not through particularly great writing either in this instance. Kubo himself just thought of the perfect counter to Bambietta's power and then handed it to Mayuri on a silver platter, able to then pass it off as something he just happened to have on him in his little briefcase of tricks that Nemu's carrying, as he's, well, one of the few mad scientist characters. And so we as readers have really no choice to believe it. But this is a great example, in my opinion, of how Mayuri really could defeat virtually anyone in Bleach. Komamura just had to give everything, essentially, just to bring Bambietta down, when Mayuri could have apparently just completely shut her out with these orbs if he'd gotten to her first. How do you defeat someone like that? The way Kisuke utilizes preparation is slightly different, and in some ways even less believable, to be totally honest. His preparation is often more indirect, I would say, in that rather than build out one dedicated solution, he thrives on preparing for potentially thousands of different eventualities. Meaning that pretty much, no matter what happens in a fight, he is prepared in at least some form. And we see this materialize in a few different ways throughout the series. For example, when Yami sneak attacks him from behind with a bala, despite Kisuke literally just fighting off Wonder Weiss, apparently that was a fake Kisuke. Instead, it was a portable Gigai, something he brought with him to act as a perfect decoy. And again, much in the same way, Mayuri is able to kind of hand-wave it away, excusing it by simply saying, well, I'm here, so obviously I succeeded. Kisuke also gets away with these antics by simply asking Yami if he noticed when he made the switch. And obviously the answer is no, because it's impossible to tell. It's impossible for Yami to know in the same way it was impossible for us to know. He just did it because he's Kisuke Urahara. In the final battle of the Rankar arc, Kisuke secretly fires a Kido seal into Aizen's body at the same time he launches Hado 91, disguising the seal amidst the main attack. Now, I don't really have a problem with this, but the main issue comes from the fact that Kisuke later tells Aizen he prepared the seal when he realized Aizen would have become impossible to kill once he fused with the Hogyoku. Except no one knows that Aizen has fused with the Hogyoku until barely 2 chapters prior to Kisuke arriving on the battlefield. Now, I guess it's possible Kisuke devised this seal within the space of those chapters. I think it's maybe more like 3 or 4 chapters, but it seems more like he made it earlier and was planning on bringing it just in case Aizen had fused with the Hogyoku. Again, this was likely one of his many outcomes that he had theorized and devised plans for in his head. Next up, some spoilers for the rest of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, just so you're aware. But Kisuke's preparation powers are really, I think, best put on display during his battle with Askin, to the point where Askin even reveals that Kisuke is one of the special war powers, literally placed on that list due to his unknown means, or incalculable methods. Basically the fact that he is constantly scheming, and will always outsmart whatever you have in store. And yeah, again, I mean, we see this play out in front of us. Yoruichi has been poisoned by Askin's death dealing, to the point where she can't even move. Yet Kisuke magically releases the poison for 5 minutes with an antidote he had on his person, despite having no idea who Yoruichi was up against or what Askin's powers were. I mean, Yoruichi literally theorizes that Kisuke created this immunity booster, presumably from whatever he had on him at the time, while eavesdropping on them, while waiting in hiding and watching the battle unfold. So, within the span of a few minutes at best, essentially. What's also weird about this is that we know that Kisuke is part of the Gerard battle up until barely a few chapters ago, so he's missed a lot of the battle with Askin already as it is. And again, it's hand-waved away, this time by Askin himself, who laments that this is exactly who Urahara is. When their battle eventually comes to an end, Kisuke himself at last explains his rationale in full, noting that he prepares for potentially thousands of outcomes, every single possibility is laid out on the table. When Askin dies and his gift ball deluxe goes haywire, promising to kill Kisuke and everyone else trapped inside, things look genuinely bad for Kisuke for the first time since, well, maybe ever? As he doubles over, vomiting blood as his bankai involuntarily collapses behind him, and as we know, when a user's bankai disengages on its own, it means they are nearing death. However, outside the Gift Ball Deluxe, it's revealed that Nell was stationed nearby in case of this exact scenario, as she herself notes, revealing that Kisuke planned even for this, even for his own near-death experience. But actually I kind of like this one because I think it does make some sense. Like, I think it's pretty realistic that one of the outcomes you would plan for is, in the case of the villain's death, the enemy's death, they have some kind of break glass in case of emergency final move that might take you down with them. So it kind of makes sense to me that Kisuke would have planned for that. So this is what makes Kisuke and Mayuri not only different from every other character, but also from each other too. There is one other character who is a bit like this as well, and he's already been mentioned in this video, and that's the 8th Espada Xyloporo Granz, who also falls into the mad scientist trope. But the thing with Xyloporo, though, is that while he absolutely is capable of countering a lot of moves with very little prior knowledge, for example, he just happens to be able to stop Bankai from working in his lair, and has analysed, which in itself is a nebulous term, Uryu's attacks, ensuring they don't work anymore, when he comes up against Mayuri, uniquely he is completely stumped. And the reason for this is that Kubo depicts Xyloporo as simply not being as well-versed a scientist as Mayuri. Mayuri is much more a veteran scientist than Xyloporo. From Xyloporo having never even met a Quincy before, to Mayuri having to tell him why a scientist should abhor perfection, Kubo makes it pretty clear that Xyloporo simply isn't on Mayuri's level in really any way. The only other character in the series of any real note, of any real strength anyway, who fits the mad scientist trope, is of course Aizen. But Kubo doesn't use him in that way, which I find to be interesting. The likes of Kisuke and Mayuri have their superhuman preparation abilities baked into how they fight, but Aizen doesn't really do that. And this likely stems from his incredible innate power, making it so he simply doesn't have to. Kyoko Suigetsu, for example, is just a totally broken Zanpakuto in the first place, removing a lot of Aizen's need to really come prepared. That's not to say he doesn't at all, and we see some of his caution, such as when he places a shield at the base of his neck in the fake Karakura Town battle, but that's really as far as it goes. He's not devising the perfect counter on the fly. He prefers to overwhelm and crush his opponents with his raw strength and Zanpakuto, at least initially, and seems to even scoff at the idea of Kisuke utilising tools like his portable Gigai in battle. So while Aizen is a consummate schemer in the same way Kisuke is, his plans only tend to truly influence the world and narrative outside the battle, which is unique in itself. To get an idea of how preparation, or perhaps a lack thereof, can actually affect these characters, let's take a brief look at their defeat history. And I say brief because fittingly, neither character loses very often. Mayuri's only defeat in the entire story comes at the hands of Uryu during the Soul Society arc. Despite Mayuri having completed his research on Quincy's, it turns out he's somehow never seen a Let Steal before, allowing Uryu to actually get the upper hand on the captain. So really, the only reason Uryu wins here is because Mayuri has no idea what to expect. But also, interestingly, this fight is decidedly un-Mayuri-like in many ways. He simply hasn't yet evolved into the character who is able to prepare for any solution in even the silliest of ways. Yes, he has numerous body modifications, such as his extendable arm, but he doesn't necessarily have a specific answer to Uryu's abilities. Instead, he uses his Zanpakuto to control the fight, much more than he does in really any of his following battles in the series. So when Uryu overpowers Mayuri towards the end, Mayuri has no real choice but to respond in kind, by using his bankai. And again, this is the rare occasion where Mayuri is essentially forced to use his bankai by being on the back foot, and of course it ends pretty badly for him. However, while Mayuri does lose this fight really due to being unable to prepare for and counter Uryu, He escapes death anyway, thanks to the unique nuances of his character all the same. Due to being the mad scientist trope, Mayuri has made many modifications to his body, something that is highlighted throughout the fight. And once his entire side is obliterated by Uryu's arrow, in fact, it's really more than that. This is arguably the single most devastating injury that a character actually survives in the manga. Actually, that's an interesting question. Are there any worse injuries that a character outright survives? So I'm not including Ichigo straight up dying and then being resurrected. The character has to actually survive and escape on screen. I feel like this is the worst one. I guess it could be something like Hiyori being cut in two, but even then, while I guess that's technically worse, it kind of looks and feels a bit cleaner than this. Maybe it's Aizen being cut in two by Mugetsu, but again, you don't really see that on screen. You kind of do. You kind of do see it. I don't know. Either way, he's likely holding on here due to his unique makeup, and then to compound the issue, he stabs himself in the neck with his own blade, and somehow, miraculously, turns himself into a liquid that apparently can't be interfered with, and enables his own escape. So what I'm getting at here is that even in a circumstance where Mayuri loses, and was unable to adequately prepare, he still manages to evade death thanks to his unique characterization. Although he wins his battle against Pernida, that's another interesting example. Mayuri has no idea what Pernida is until he actually witnesses its reveal and is then forced to fight it on the fly. That's not to say he doesn't have some items on his person that are perfectly suited to the battle, such as when he uses acid to inflict immense pain upon Pernida's exposed nerves, although I actually wonder why he never uses that again unless he threw it all out in one move. But ultimately he doesn't have any intel on the left arm, really. He knows a bit about it from reading, textbooks and stuff like that, but he is essentially fighting it by winging it, which is pretty cool to see. And unsurprisingly, this results in Mayuri having the toughest fight of his life since Uryu, where he's constantly being pushed to the brink, to the point where it felt like Kubo was doing this on purpose to make a kind of statement, after Mayuri totally steamrolled his previous two battles in Xyloporo and Giselle. Interestingly though, even in a fight where, for all intents and purposes, Mayuri is outmatched, he still reveals his newly modified bankai, which, funnily enough, is essentially a meta-commentary on the character. By feeding the bankai information throughout the battle, the bankai then births a Jizo that is effectively the perfect counter to whatever it's fighting. So this is Mayuri's whole fighting style boiled down into an actual bankai ability, which is honestly pretty funny, and feels like an admission from Kubo in a sense. Kisuke is actually a little more difficult to analyse in this way because, well, he never really loses a single battle. The closest he comes to losing in a fight is against Aizen, and so that's the one we, need to begin with. Now obviously Aizen is a special case in many ways, and particularly here where he's begun to transcend thanks to the Hogyoku. Conventional tactics kind of go out the window here. But Kisuke comes prepared as best he can regardless, and attempts to utilise several of these plans in the battle. Firstly, or at least the first we know of, Kisuke tries to burn Aizen alive from the inside by sealing off the Reiatsu vents on his wrists, essentially targeting a key weakness to any Shinigami. A tactic that Aizen himself admits would have worked had he not already begun his ascension. Aizen's soul has already begun breaking down, has already begun to be restructured by the Hogyoku, and as a result the seals don't kill him, forcing Kisuke to have to change things up on the fly. As a result, Kisuke ends up attempting to fight Aizen with force instead, using the power of his Shikai in conjunction with both Yoruichi and Isshin, which seems almost uncharacteristic for the consummate schemer. It's like he's out of options. But of course, in reality, by this point, he's actually already shot Aizen with the Kido seal in secret. In fact, he does that even before he tries to kill him with the Reiatsu Vents plan, because it's the sealing of Aizen's Reiatsu Vents that basically kills him, and it's killing him that allows him to ascend to his next phase. I feel like it would have been cool if Kisuke had actually had maybe one more plan up his sleeve, one more unique way to try and destroy Aizen's body or something, even if just to distract Aizen from the true plan, because the Kido seal has always been a bit weird to me in a way. The only reason it even activates is because Ichigo's Mugetsu catastrophically weakens Aizen. So again, one can assume that Kisuke planned for that to happen? But there was really no guarantee whatsoever, and it kind of seems like there was no other plan. Which is a bit odd. Maybe Kisuke was expecting the Ryatsu seals or Ishin's Getsuga to weaken Aizen enough to activate the seal, but who knows? Either way, this is really Kisuke's clearest loss. He, Yoruichi, and Ishin are simply overpowered by Aizen in his cocoon form, and we see Kisuke knocked out on the ground. But even then, did he really lose? Ultimately, his Kido Seal plan works in the end, and he's there to witness Aizen's imprisonment and the end of the war. He gets the last laugh. Ultimately, it's Kisuke's victory, and it's thanks to him technically planning for every possible scenario. Except, what's weird about this is it feels like he didn't plan for every scenario at all here. Instead, he planned for just the one, and it so happens to play out. And then, of course, really the only other time Kisuke comes close to losing a battle is the one we already discussed, his fight with Askin. And yet, even though it seems like he's about to die, well, he planned for that too. Which is interesting in the sense that it calls into question one of the main questions I posed at the start of this video. How exactly do you defeat someone like this? How do you kill someone like this? Seriously, Kisuke and Mayuri's powers of preparation might be one of the most broken abilities in Bleach, and I'm not joking. They are busted because they carry with them the weight of the author himself. And so yeah, that brings us nicely to the final point. How strong are characters like Kisuke Urahara and Mayuri Kurotsuchi? How strong are they in the context of ranking Bleach characters? Because we tend to try and judge everyone by the same criteria, but this idea of being prepared, of planning, of using their intelligence in battle in this way is simply a part of their character. It's not fair to dismiss it, in the same way it wouldn't be fair to dismiss Kenpachi's battle prowess, or Kyoraku's tendency to fight in an underhanded, opportunistic way, or Kyoraku's tendency to fight in an underhanded, opportunistic fashion. But should we even be thinking of these mad scientist characters in this same way, or are they just fundamentally too different? Because look, when given adequate preparation time, I simply don't think there is any character in the series that they couldn't defeat, save for maybe transcendent beings. But even then, Kisuke had a plan ready to go for Aizen. That's the inherent madness of these characters. There's absolutely nothing to say that if they came up against, say, Kenpachi, who through whatever means gains the godlike ability to destroy anything in a single swing of his sword, what's stopping Mayuri, and by extension Kubo, from just pulling out an invention that captures the power of a single sword strike, converts it into energy, and then reflects it back at the attacker, thus defeating this newly godly Kenpachi in a single move? Well, there isn't, because that's how these characters operate. They're an author conduit, in a sense, and while intriguing, it also means they are always going to be operating outside of the established rules. They are always going to be inherently broken. And I don't mean broken in terms of how strong they are, but broken when compared to the rest of the cast. They don't quite fit perfectly. Sure, we could analyse them based on their Zanpakuto, that's no problem. We can even analyse them based on how they've performed in a fight physically, what we've actually seen from each of them. And by using that information, yeah, you could probably reliably rank them both. But by ignoring their power to prepare for battle in a way no other character can, you're not only unduly neutering their capabilities, but you're not really representing Kisuke and Mayuri truthfully. Because neither of them would ever really enter a battle in that naked state. Like I said, Kisuke is honestly even crazier than Mayuri in that sense. We've seen from his battles with Uryu and Pernida that Mayuri can end up on the back foot without enough immediate initial data. But Kisuke is quite literally prepared for anything at all times. That is superhuman. In the same way Kenpachi, for example, is nearly impossible to bring down. So yeah, taking their ability to prepare into account, the two mad scientists are, without a doubt, two of the very strongest characters in Bleach. I mean, hell, Mayuri took down a literal god with very limited intel, while, like I said, Kisuke has practically never lost a fight to date. But what do you think? How strong are these characters and how do you realistically go about defeating them? When we've seen by analysing their individual histories that, well, no one ever really truly defeats them, there's almost always an out or a workaround or something, and it feels like these characters are uniquely positioned where they kind of need the plot itself to defeat them. Which sounds ridiculous, I know, but it does make sense, especially considering Kisuke and Mayuri's unique connection to Kubo himself in that way. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Let me know down in the comments below how strong are Kisuke and Mayuri in the grand scheme of things in Bleach when you account for their ability to be prepared, to prepare for everything. How does that factor in, and how does that mean they stack up to the rest of the cast? I'd love to get your thoughts down in the comments below, so do please let me know. Okay, everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already. Check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. Maybe give us a subscribe over there. Your support does mean the world. And as always, a massive thank you goes out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without who I simply couldn't do this. Your support does mean the absolute world. It makes a massive difference to the health of the channel, and I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much. Alright, guys, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.